The last two verses that we studied in our last class were a kind of short prologue to what we will begin to learn from now on. In those two verses, 67 and 68, there we find the Master calling the disciples' attention to what is going to be the entire theme of the Vivekachudamani. He said, "The question that you have asked today is an excellent one, appreciated by those versed in the scriptures, brief like a sutra but full of hidden meaning. It is just what seekers after liberation need to know." All seekers of truth and liberation need to find answers to the seven great questions asked by the disciple. What is bondage? How did it begin? In what is it rooted? How is one set free from it? What is the not self? What is the supreme self? And how does one discriminate between them? Those were the seven great questions. As we heard last week, everything that is to be known about the soul, the world, and reality is contained in these seven questions. It is as if the disciple has foreknown the rest of the book, because that is what it is. So the Master says, "Listen attentively, O learned one, to what I am going to say. By listening to it, you will at once become free from the bonds of the world." We had come up to this point. Now the Sadguru begins to answer the questions. So we take up the 69th verse now. "Mokshasya hetu prathamo nigadyate vairagyamatyantamanityavastushu tatash shamaschapi damas titiksha nyasah prasakta khila karmanam bhrisham." Mokshasya hetu prathamo nigadyate vairagyamatyantam anityavastushu tatash shamaschapi damas titiksha nyasah prasakta khila karmanam bhrisham. The first step to liberation is an extreme aversion for all things that are non-eternal. The first step to liberation is an extreme aversion for all things that are non-eternal. Then follow calmness, self-control, forbearance, and the complete abandonment of all work done from personal desire. The meaning is clear. We have heard much about these qualities during our study of the sadhana chatushtaya, the fourfold means to liberation. But some may wonder why the Master is not answering the questions in the order they were put. The disciple had formulated his questions very logically. He had asked them in an orderly way. So why does the Master take up a question in the middle, the fourth one to be exact? Why should he take up a question in the middle and choose to answer that first? Let us keep in mind, the Master is no ordinary teacher. He is a Sadguru. He knows what he is doing. Logic is all very well, but the disciple's house is on fire. If you remember, "O Master, O friend of all devotees, I bow down before you. O you boundless ocean of mercy, I fall into this sea of samsara. Save me with that steady glance of your eyes, which shed supreme nectar-like grace." This is how the disciple had approached the Master in verses 35 and 36. I'm burning in the unquenchable forest fire of samsara and shaken violently by the winds of misfortune. I'm terrified and seek refuge in you. Save me from death. I know none else with whom to seek shelter. So, the Sadguru, the master, is only dealing with the emergency by doing the most essential thing first. Logic can wait. There's a beautiful verse which says, Scriptures are endless, and what has to be learnt is enormous. But time is short, and the obstacles are many. One has to choose the essentials like the swan that separates the milk from a mixture of milk and water. I repeat, Scriptures are endless, and what has to be learnt is enormous. But time is short, and the obstacles are many. One has to choose the essentials like the swan that separates the milk from a mixture of milk and water. This is just what the master is helping the disciple do. First things first. And the very first of those first things is vairagya, renunciation. As we read in verse 21 and the following verses, renunciation is the strong inner urge to give up all transitory enjoyments, having come to know their inherent defects. It's not just non-attachment, but an utter disregard of all pleasures, gross and subtle. That is invariably followed by shama, mental calmness or serenity. Because when the mind has detached itself from all distractions, it rests steadily on its goal, and that is called shama, that calmness and serenity. And next, side by side with shama, dhamma also has to be practiced. Dhamma is self-control, control of the body and the senses, restraining the sense organs from moving towards their respective objects and holding them in check. That is what dhamma is. Then comes titiksha, which means patience, forbearance, endurance. Titiksha implies withstanding all troubles that arise when the senses come in contact with their objects. It's a quiet, uncomplaining acceptance of all suffering, whether physical or psychological, an acceptance of everything, knowing that it is inevitable as long as one has to live in the world. And lastly, we have Akhila Prasakta Karmanam Nyasaha, the total relinquishment of all action done out of attachment. As a teacher of Advaita Vedanta, Shankaracharya is a staunch upholder of the Jnana Marga. He insists that the seeker after moksha should completely renounce all works mentioned in the Karma Kanda of the Veda. Not just the desire for the fruits of karma, but even karma itself. According to him, karma and jnana are incompatible. Why? Karma implies an awareness and an acceptance of multiplicity. Not just awareness, it implies an acceptance of multiplicity. While the aim of jnana is to see only unity. That's a very big difference. So, according to Shankaracharya, work forms the discipline of karma yogis. They purify their hearts through selfless work and become ready for knowledge. It doesn't apply to sannyasis who follow the jnana marga. Sannyasis have to renounce all karmas, religious rites and ceremonies, philanthropic works, and all such other secular activities, because they're all based on the idea of multiplicity, and they're mostly induced by desire. If this is not done, in Shankaracharya's opinion, if this is not done, there's no hope of freeing oneself from the bondage of samsara. But let's not misunderstand him. He is neither criticizing the performance of karmas nor minimizing the importance of karma yoga as a spiritual discipline. He is only pointing out the relative roles of karma and jnana in higher spiritual development. Both are necessary, but both have their respective places. All that he means is karma cannot directly lead to the perception of reality. I hope the point is clear. So, mokshasya hetu prathamo nigadyate vairagyam anityavastushu tata shamaschapi damas titiksha nyasa prasaktakhila karmanam bhrisham. The first step to liberation is an extreme aversion for all things that are non-eternal. Then follow calmness, self-control, forbearance, and the complete abandonment of all work done from personal desire. Now, spiritual disciplines in Advaita Vedanta fall under two distinct categories. The first set of disciplines is collectively called the external or indirect means, and the second is called the internal or direct means. In fact, spiritual life itself is divided into two stages, preparatory and advanced, and the practices of each stage have their own specific goals. The purpose of the first stage is chitta shuddhi, purification of the mind. And the aim of the second is jnana prapti, the attainment of knowledge. So these are the twin goals, chitta shuddhi and jnana prapti. As you can understand, the first stage is designed to prepare, to qualify the aspirant for the next. So, the sadhana chatushtaya, the fourfold means, including the Shat Sampattis, the 6 spiritual treasures, which have all been described in detail in 11 verses, from the 17th to the 27th. There it has all been described in detail. Those disciplines plus the selfless performance of one's personal and social duties, varna, ashrama, dharmas. All of them come under the first group. They're all meant for chitta shuddhi. They don't directly lead to jnana, but they serve the purpose of cleansing the heart, without which jnana cannot be had. In that sense, they are supposed to be indirect means. They prepare, they qualify the aspirant for the next advanced stage in which the higher disciplines of Advaita Vedanta are practiced. And these higher disciplines are supposed to be the direct means to jnana and moksha. So what are they? They are shravana, manana, nididhyasana, leading to samadhi. Hearing, reflection and contemplation, and meditation. All of which leading to absorption. If we leave out samadhi or absorption, the other three are what are together called vichara, enquiry, investigation, reflection, contemplation, meditation. These are all called vichara together. Enquiring about the nature of one's own self. investigating into the real meaning of the Guru's instructions about the nature of Atman and Brahman, reflecting deeply on the words of the scriptures, and after sufficient reflection, with the help of proper reasoning, the aspirant next devotes oneself to meditation on Brahman. And in the depths of meditation, reality is perceived. But before moving on to Shravana, Manana and Nididhyasana, I would like to once again clarify Shankaracharya's stand on the role of work or action in the life of a spiritual aspirant, because that is important. According to him, an unillumined spiritual seeker first follows karma yoga, that is to say, they perform their duties without attachment. As a result of karma yoga, one gradually frees oneself from egotism, desire, and passion. When the heart becomes pure as a result of this practice, it naturally happens, one takes less and less interest in outside activities and pays more and more attention to contemplation and meditation. One's attention is diverted from the outer life to the inner life. It's all a result of faithful practice of karma yoga. Gradually, our activities are reduced to the bare maintenance of the body, and the entire mind is devoted to contemplation of the Atman. And through that intense spiritual practice, the heart becomes extremely pure, entirely pure, and such purity of heart is instantaneously followed by the attainment of knowledge. So in this way, Karma Yoga plays an indirect but a very vital role in the realization of jnana. So, nowhere does Shankaracharya show contempt for Karma Yoga. He knows the value of action in the unfoldment of spiritual life. And it does recommend Karma Yoga for beginners. But the beginning stages have to be outgrown as soon as possible. The capacity for higher forms of spiritual practice, the capacity has to be developed. The goal is to realize the unity that underlies all multiplicity. So, karmas have to be transcended and jnana has to be cultivated through vichara. And the sooner this happens, the better, in Shankaracharya's opinion. So the Sadguru continues, Tatashrutis tanmananam satatvadhyanam chiram nitya nirantaram muneh tato vikalpam parametya vidvan ihaiva nirvana sukham samruchyate. Tatashrutis tanmananam satatvadhyanam chiram nitya nirantaram muneh tato vikalpam parametya vidvan ihaiva nirvana sukham samruchyate. Then the disciple must hear the truth about the Atman and reflect on it and meditate upon it constantly, without pause, for a long time. Thus, a wise person reaches that supreme nirvikalpa state and one realizes the bliss of nirvana while still living on earth. So now, in order that the knowledge of Brahman may be realized directly and clearly and not merely understood intellectually, for this reason, the master prescribes the three main disciplines known as Shravana, hearing, Manana, reflection, and Nididhyasana, meditation, which lead to one another. and to the final discipline, absorption in Brahman, Samadhi. Hearing means listening to the instructions of the teacher who explains from the scriptures and from his own experience the oneness of Atman and Brahman. Reflection is thinking constantly of Brahman, which is taught in this manner, thinking constantly of Brahman and strengthening one's conviction regarding its reality with the help of suitable reasoning. This is how the seeker's wrong or contrary ideas regarding Brahman are removed. And meditation means the continuous dwelling of the mind on a stream of ideas that are identical with the conception of the non-dual Brahman. Continuous dwelling of the mind on a stream of ideas identical with the conception of the non-dual Brahman to the exclusion of all other ideas such as the body, senses, mind and ego. This is Nididhyasana. The verse says, when meditation is practiced without break, Nitya Nirantaram, for a long time, Chiram, with intense love for the ideal and with unflagging determination for its realization, that leads to Samadhi, absorption in Brahman, Nirvikalpa Samadhi. In Nirvikalpa Samadhi, it is there all consciousness of duality of subject and object, it is all dissolved away and the infinite unitary consciousness alone remains. That is the avikalpa or nirvikalpa state. So if these disciplines are practiced in this manner, the rishis, the acharyas, they all assure that the knowledge of Brahman will be realized directly and clearly like a fruit on the palm of one's hand, to use their own expression. Brahman is said to be experienced like a fruit on the palm of one's hand. But the practice has to be kept up for a long time, chiram. Why? So that the deep-rooted tendency to mistake the anatman for the atman is completely banished from the mind. And they must be practiced without interruption, nitya nirantaram, as long as even a dreamlike perception of the phenomenal universe, of the physical body remains. Because even after the truth has been known, there often lingers a strong, primordial, stubborn notion of ego. The ego will not leave so easily. It can be destroyed only by actually living for some time in Nirvikalpa Samadhi, in a state of constant communion with Brahman. If you remember the story of Sri Ramakrishna's Vedanta Guru, Totapuri, you will see this. Even though he was a realized soul, he would practice meditation, he would practice samadhi every day. When one becomes perfect in nididhyasana and samadhi by continuous and unbroken practice, one becomes a knower of Brahman, Vidwan, and one enjoys the unalloyed bliss of nirvana in this life itself, ihaiva. This is the path laid down by Vedanta for seekers who wish to realize Brahman in this life itself. So, tatashrutis tanmananam satatvadhyanam chiram nitya nirantaram munehe tato vikalpam parametya vidvan ihaiva nirvana sukham samruchati. Then the disciple must hear the truth about the Atman and reflect on it and meditate upon it constantly, without pause, for a long time. Thus, a wise person reaches that supreme nirvikalpa state, and one realizes the bliss of nirvana while still living on earth. So we see that the Master lays down for the mumukshu disciple first the 4 basic qualifications: discernment, renunciation, the 6 spiritual treasures, which include calmness of mind, self-control, self-settledness, forbearance, concentration, faith, and finally, longing for liberation. When the disciple has acquired all these qualifications, the Master next prescribes the 3 higher steps: hearing, reflection, and meditation, which lead to the realization of Brahman and liberation in life. So, this is the whole scheme of spiritual practice on the path of knowledge. Now, in his 4th question, the disciple had asked, "How is one set free from bondage?" And the Master's reply is, this is how. Through the practice of all these spiritual disciplines. So these are the things mumukshus need to know, first of all, before anything else. Then, after having mentioned the direct and indirect means to moksha, then the Master turns his attention to the disciple's next 3 questions. Kosavanatma paramah ka atma. What is the non-self and what is the supreme self? And how does one discriminate between them? How does one discern between them? These questions the Master will now begin to answer in really great detail, because that is the task on hand now. How to distinguish between the not-self and the self. So, in verse 71, the Master begins by saying, Yad bodhavyam tavedanim atmanatma vivechanam taduchyate maya samyak shrutvatmanyavadharaya. Yad bodhavyam tavedanim atmanatma vivechanam taduchyate maya samyak shrutvatmanyavadharaya. Now I am going to explain to you fully what you ought to know, the discernment between the self and the not-self. So listen carefully and ascertain the truth of it in your own mind. The disciple knows that jnana leads to moksha. That is all right. But how does jnana arise? How does jnana arise in the first place? That has to be known first. So, yad bodhavyam tava idani. What ought to be learned by you now? You must learn atma anatma vivechanam. You must learn to discern between the Atman and the Anatman. As it is now, the two have become hopelessly mixed up. The two are mutually opposed, like day and night, like light and darkness. The Atman is pure consciousness and intelligence. The Anatman is matter and insentient. But you are identifying them with each other. By associating the attributes of the Atman with the Anatman and the qualities of the Anatman with the Atman, you have become a victim of your own ignorance. You are unable to distinguish between the two, and you superimpose the attributes of the one upon the other. Out of ignorance, you confuse the Atman with the Anatman, and this confusion is evident in every thought and action of your daily practical life. You say, this is I, this is mine, where you identify the I, which is pure consciousness, with material objects like the body, mind, and the senses. And because of the same confusion, you associate the eternal Atman with the characteristics of the body. And this confusion is evident when you say, I was born, I've grown, I'm ill, I will die. So the Master says, it is discernment between the Atman and the Anatman that brings knowledge of the truth. The Atman is one. It is homogeneous, changeless consciousness. But the Anatman is multiple. It is changeful and material. But now, the only way the Atman can be identified is by negating the Anatman. We have no other means of doing it. How to do that? The first step is to know the Anatman in all its aspects. It is through the Anatman that the Atman has to be known. The Anatman is easily known because it is gross and material. But when that is fully known, the knowledge of the subtle Atman becomes easy. So, taduchyate maya samyak. That will be explained by me fully in all detail. Then, shrutva atmani avadharaya. Listen carefully to what I say and ascertain the truth of it. Be convinced of what I am saying in your own mind. You need not believe it because they happen to be my words or because you think they are the teachings of the Shastras. Think over it deeply and realize the truth of it inside your own soul. Make that knowledge your own. So, yad bodhavyam tavedanim atmanatma vivechanam taduchyate maya samyak shrutvatmanyavadharaya. Now I am going to explain to you fully what you ought to know. The discernment between the self and the not-self. Listen carefully and ascertain the truth of it in your own mind. In a way, the real teaching of the Vivekachudamani, that is to say, the philosophical part of the book, begins from here. What was said until now was a fairly long prelude, Einleitung, to the main teaching of the work. The purpose of the last 71 verses, their purpose was to prepare us mentally for the real teachings which begin now, from verse 72. Shankaracharya, or the Sadguru here, the Sadguru doesn't answer the disciples' questions in the same sequence as they were asked. The ultimate truth is simple, but unfortunately, in our present state of ignorance, in our state of forgetfulness, it is not as simple for us to understand it. A great deal of explanation is required. So the Master's answers are long and sometimes complex. So, for the sake of ease of understanding, the questions are reordered. And the first question the Master takes up is, what is the not-self? Because that is something our minds can grasp now. The enlightened Master comes down to our level and gradually leads us through higher, subtler stages of self-discovery on to the final realization of the true self. Just so you know, in the next 52 verses, from 72 to 123, in these 52 verses, the Master gives a comprehensive account of the not-self, Anatman. In verses 72 to 91, he describes the sthula sharira, the gross body. Then, from 92 to 107, the sukshma sharira, subtle body. And from 108 to 123, the karana sharira, the causal body. But let us begin from the beginning. In the following two verses, 72 and 73, in the following two verses, the Master speaks of the gross body. This gross body, we all know. This is the only thing we are sure of, so to say. And this is what we refer to as the I. But what is it? The verse says, Majjasthimeda palarakta charmas tvagahvayair dhatubhirebhir anvitam padoru vaksho bhujaprishtamastakair angair upayungtametat aham mameti prathitam shariram mohaspadam sthulamitiriyate budhaihi. Majjasthimeda palarakta charmas tvagahvayair dhatubhirebhiranvitam padoru vaksho bhujaprishtamastakair angair upayungtametat aham mameti prathitam shariram mohaspadam sthulamitiriyate budhaihi. Composed of seven ingredients, marrow, bone, fat, flesh, blood, skin, and the epidermis. Composed of these seven and consisting of the limbs and their parts. What are they? Legs, thighs, chest, arms, back, and head. So composed of the seven ingredients and consisting of the limbs and their parts, this body is reputed to be the abode, the root of the delusion of I and mine. Sages call it the gross body. This is what we think we are, mostly. We have no difficulty in accepting the external world of names and forms and objects as the not self. Because the external world is clearly outside us. But when it comes to this body, though we see that it is composed of matter, we somehow lose that objectivity. It is a fact that the body is nothing more than a combination of what Shankaracharya calls the Sapta Dhatus. Seven material ingredients: marrow, bone, fat, flesh, blood, skin, and epidermis. All these things in the form of the limbs and their parts. Legs, thighs, chest, arms, back, and head. The limbs and their parts. Angair, upayungtam. That is all what the gross body is. It is dependent upon food for its existence. And it only lives as long as it can assimilate that food. Then, it is not seen before it is born, and it is not seen after it dies. So its existence is temporary and its qualities are passing. And it is changeful by nature. In spite of knowing all this, we still think we are it. We are the bodies. Aham mameti prathitam mohaspadam. It is the root, the basis of the delusion of I and mine. I am none other than the all-pervading, ever-free, infinite spirit. As such, I can never be this little body, but in my ignorance, I identify myself with it. I say, I sit, I stand, I go, which implies that I am the body. Or I say, my head, my hands, my feet, and so on and so forth. Which means I think the body is mine. But both are wrong. But how does this happen? How does this happen? Let's take the classic illustration of the red hot iron ball. Taptayah pinda. Our present individuality is like a red hot iron ball. The ball and the light seem inseparable. But they are not really one. They can be separated. Light is everywhere and it is colorless. But because it appears red and round, we make the mistake of thinking that light has color and form and that it is seen in a particular place at a certain time. So what is the cause of this error? The iron ball, the medium, that is the mischief maker. So this is how it all happens. The Atman is everywhere at all times, but I only perceive its light shining through the body. And I commit the error of mistaking the body for the Atman. The body both reveals and limits. The body both reveals and limits the light of the Atman. But I don't know that. This is how the infinite Atman comes to be identified with the finite body. And once this is allowed to happen, the rest of the mischief takes place as a matter of course. The properties of the Atman are superimposed upon the Anatman and vice versa, and you know the rest of the story. But the danger of it is, though this body is constantly subject to all manner of unpleasant changes, though it is the cause of much suffering, it is still an object of extreme attachment to us. As Sri Ramakrishna used to say, even Brahman weeps entrapped in the snare of the 5 elements. Even Brahman weeps entrapped in the snare of the 5 elements. That is the power of delusion. It is extremely hard to get over this body identification. It is as if the infinite, ever-free spirit is forced into a finite body and confined there. It is literally a case of rigorous imprisonment. How great the suffering must be. As long as one doesn't give up this mistaken identification with the body, one cannot experience the bliss of freedom, however great one may be as a philosopher or a scientist. That is why we hardly ever find sages and mystics praising or glorifying the body. The disease of body consciousness is already bad enough. Why make it worse? That is how they see things. Some teachers have even gone to the extent of saying that it is not so much that the body is subject to disease. It is not that the body is subject to disease, the body itself is the disease. The body is the disease that the soul has contracted. We may feel it is an extreme view of things, but it's not a question of whether we like it or not. If somebody doesn't like it, it is not for them. But the masters will tell it like it is, for our own good. That is why even Christ said, "He that is able to receive it, let him receive it." That's all. Shankaracharya has already said in the previous verse, "Listen carefully to what I say. Think over it deeply and realize the truth of it within yourself." But please, let us get it clear. It is not Shankaracharya's intention to criticize the body. This body is the best and the only instrument we have for realizing the highest goal of human life. He has himself reminded us of this right at the beginning of the book. You may please recall those few verses. The body can be a help to the soul if it is regarded as an instrument, just as a house or a vehicle is a help to its owner. The body is meant for the Atman and not the other way around. So take proper care of it, give it what is due to it, but there is no need to pamper it, verwöhnen oder verhätscheln. There's no need to pamper it or worship it. That is all what Shankaracharya means. So, majjasthimeda palarakta charmas tvagahvayair dhatu bhirebhiranvitam padoruvaksho bhujaprishthamastakai rangai rupangai rupayungtametat aham mameti prathitam shariram mohaspadam sthulamitiryate budhai. Composed of the 7 ingredients: marrow, bone, fat, flesh, blood, skin, epidermis, and consisting of the limbs and their parts: legs, thighs, chest, arms, back, head. This body is reputed to be the abode, the root of the delusion of I and mine. Sages call it the gross body. Now we have a fairly good picture of the gross body. The Master has described its inner composition and its outer form, both. It is composed of the 7 dhatus, ingredients, and it consists of the various angas, limbs. Just so we don't forget, why does the Master go into all that detail about the physical body? Because it is discernment between the Atman and the Anatman that brings knowledge of the truth. Please remember this. The Atman is one changeless consciousness, the Anatman is multiple, changeful matter. But the only way of identifying the Atman is by negating the Anatman. So that is the purpose. With that same purpose in view, the Master continues his analysis of the gross body in the next 2 verses, 73 and 74. How did the body come into existence, first of all? What is its origin? Nabho nabhasvad dahanambu bhumaya Sukshmani bhutani bhavanti tani parasparamshair militani bhutva sthulani cha sthula sharira hetavah matra stadiya vishaya bhavanti shabdadaya pancha sukhaya bhoktuh. Nabho nabhasvad dahanambu bhumaya Sukshmani bhutani bhavanti tani parasparamshair militani bhutva sthulani cha sthula sharira hetavah matra stadiya vishaya bhavanti shabdadayah pancha sukhaya bhoktuh. Space, air, fire, water and earth are the subtle elements. When they unite with parts of one another, they become gross and form the gross body. When the 5 subtle elements unite with parts of one another, they become the gross body. And their subtle essences, sound and the rest. The subtle essences means the objects of the senses. Touch, sight, taste, smell. Sorry, I left out the first one. Sound, touch, sight, taste and smell. These form the 5 sense objects. These exist for the pleasure of the experiencer, the individual soul. I repeat, space, air, fire, water and earth. These are the subtle elements. When they unite with parts of one another, they become gross and form the gross body. Their subtle essences, sound, touch, sight, taste, and smell, they form the 5 sense objects. These exist for the pleasure of the experiencer, the individual soul. The verse leads to Vedantic cosmology. Cosmology, as you know, is the branch of philosophy that deals with the origin, development, and structure of the universe. Simply put, how does the universe come into being? What is its cause? What is it made of? What are the laws that govern it? Does it have a purpose? And what is its ultimate fate? How does the universe come into being? What is its cause? What is it made up of? What are the laws that govern it? Does it have a purpose? What is its ultimate fate? Cosmology tries to find answers to questions like these. These are not the only questions, but these are the important ones. Vedanta has its own cosmology and its theory of how matter came into existence. How matter came into existence. The Vedantic theory of this is known as Panchikarana. You must have heard this word. Quintuplication or 5-fold combination. You know about Prakriti, cosmic energy, and its 3 gunas, Sattva, Rajas, Tamas. When there is an equilibrium of the gunas, the universe remains in a state of non-manifestation or dissolution. When that equilibrium is disturbed, that disturbance starts the process of creation, manifestation of the material universe. And the first element to evolve is space. From space evolves air. From air, fire. From fire, water. And from water, earth. So space, air, fire, water, earth. At this initial stage of creation, these 5 elements are still subtle. Subtle, rudimentary means extremely simple and basic, and they are unmixed. Subtle, rudimentary, unmixed. They are not what we mean by space, air, fire, water, and earth. At this stage, they are extremely fine and they belong to an entirely different order. But the gross elements are different. They are compounds. They are produced by combinations of the subtle elements in certain proportions. I repeat, the gross elements are different. They are produced by combinations of the subtle elements in certain proportions. What is that? What is that proportion? Each gross element consists of 1/2 portion of its subtle counterpart and 1/8 of each of the 4 remaining subtle elements. We are talking about the composition of the gross element. So each gross element consists of 1/2 portion of its subtle counterpart, its own subtle counterpart, and 1/8 of each of the 4 remaining subtle elements. Let me explain. It is quite simple. Gross space, Akasha, for example, gross space consists of 1/2 portion, 50% of subtle space, and 1/8, that is 12.5% each of subtle air, subtle fire, subtle water, and subtle earth. So, each gross element contains all 5 of the subtle elements, but its name is derived from the preponderance of its particular counterpart. Now, each subtle element has its own special characteristic, its own property. The unique characteristic of subtle space is sound. Akasha is the subtle element and its quality is Shabda. Of subtle air, it is touch. Of subtle fire, form. Of subtle water, taste. And of subtle earth, smell. So, the characteristic of subtle space is sound, of subtle air is touch, of subtle fire, form, of subtle water, taste, and of subtle earth, smell. But because the subtle elements are extremely fine, their properties are imperceptible to the senses. They only become tangible in the gross elements. Gross space has the property of sound. Gross air of sound plus touch. Gross fire of sound, touch plus form. Gross water of sound, touch, form plus taste. And gross earth of sound, touch, form, taste plus smell. You must have noticed it. Each succeeding gross element in the series, each succeeding gross element has one property more than the preceding one. And that additional property is its special characteristic. So, these elements, subtle and gross, they are, so to say, the building blocks of the tangible physical universe. From the subtle elements are produced the subtle bodies of living beings plus, as we saw just now, the gross elements. I repeat, from the subtle elements come the subtle bodies of living beings plus the gross elements. And from the gross elements is produced the gross universe. And one last thing, Vedanta speaks of 5 elements only. Why? There could be many more. But Vedanta takes into account only 5. The reason is, from the standpoint of sense perception, there are only 5 elementary or 5 sense objects in the universe. Sound, touch, form, taste and smell. Our senses can't perceive anything beyond these. That is why in Vedanta we have only 5 elements. And as Shankaracharya says in the last line of the verse, all this is meant for the experience of the individual soul. All this means these 5 sense objects. But we'll continue with this topic in our next class. For now, that is all. Thank you.